Okay, so it's 2:05. We're running on Barrie time, which means we're only 5 minutes late rather than Toronto time, which might be 10 minutes, I guess. So I wanted to thank everyone for joining us on a beautiful Saturday for this talk with Erika DeFreitas and Daisy Desrosiers, and we're very grateful to them for taking the time to join us. Before we begin, I'd like to just do our land acknowledgement for Barrie. I recognize we're coming in from different places, but the MacLaren is in Barrie, and so we'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, which include the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. The local bands consist of the Chippewa Tri-Council, who are made up of Beausoleil First Nation, Georgina Island First Nation, and Rama First Nation. We would also like to acknowledge the Wendat Nation, the Huron, who occupied these lands prior to the middle of the 17th century. So today I'm joined by Eric and Daisy, who are here to talk to us about an exhibition that we have up by Erika entitled Everything She Inspires Remains Belongs to Light. We are, of course, closed right now through the stay-at-home order, but there is a virtual exhibition online if you would like to see it, as well as a really brilliant text by Daisy that she's contributed for the exhibition. Just to introduce Erika and Daisy, Erika DeFreitas is a Scarborough-based artist whose practice includes the use of performance photography, video installation, textiles, works on paper, and writing. Placing an emphasis on process, the gesture, the body, documentation, and paranormal phenomena, she works through attempts to understand concepts of lost, post-memory, inheritance, and objecthood. DeFreitas' work has been exhibited nationally and internationally, and she has won awards from the Toronto Friends of Visual Arts 2016 Finalist Artist Prize, the 2016 John Hartman Award, and she was longlisted for the 2017 So We Art Award. Erika holds a Master of Visual Studies from the University of Toronto. And then we have Daisy Desrosiers, who's joining us from Maine today. Daisy is the inaugural Director of Artist Programs at the Lunder Institute for American Art at Colby College in Waterville, Maine. She is an interdisciplinary art historian and independent curator. Her thesis concerns the cultural, post-colonial, and material implications of the use of sugar in contemporary art. She was the guest critic for the Brooklyn Rail in May 2020 and curated exhibitions in Canada, the US, and Europe. In 2018, she was the inaugural recipient of the Nicholas Fox Weber Curatorial Fellowship, affiliated with the Gluckman Museum in Cork, Ireland, as well as a curatorial fellow in residence at Art in General in Brooklyn, New York. And Daisy is also joining us on February 20th for a masterclass in art writing. And information for that class is on our website. So that's another opportunity to get to know Daisy better. So I think we're going to begin actually with Erika just describing her exhibition before Erika and Daisy begin their conversation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Erika.
Hi, thank you everyone for being here. And Daisy and Emily, thank you so much for being in conversation with me today. Before I start talking about the exhibition, I think so much magic happens behind the scenes that people don't get to see. And this does not happen in isolation. So I really want to take a moment to thank the people who have helped to put this together. And I know I'm missing a lot of people, but I really want to thank Carolyn Bell Farrell and the new executive director of the MacLaren, Karen Carter, Tyler Durbano, who's helping out with amazing accessibility opportunities for the exhibition, Andre Bettineau, who helped install everything and paint those gorgeous walls, along with Mike Farnan, and Petra Hewson, Christine Gillespie, and John Hartman. I was the recipient of the 2016 John Hartman Award. I saved that money, and that money helped me make some of the travels and produce some of the work that's in this exhibition. And last but not least, Emily, who has supported me throughout many years and helped this exhibition come into fruition, and the wonderful Daisy for participating by contributing such a lovely essay for the exhibition. So thank you for this. So for this exhibition, I'm excited. This is my first time really kind of talking about it. Everything she inspires remains, belongs to light. The she makes reference to all the women who I am working with and spending time with and sharing space with in these artworks. In May 2018, I had sent Emily an email because she had once mentioned to me that Baudelaire had done seances in Paris. And I was at that point thinking about going to Paris to do some research on those seances. And in that email, Emily responds asking if I've ever heard of Jean Duval. And then she provides this brief kind of description about Jean, enough for me to dive in. And that's when this work kind of started to be created. On the photographs, there are 8 large scale photographs that are my attempts to spend time with Jean and thinking through the research and the information I've learned about Jean. So I'm not just spending time with Jean, I'm also spending time with an artist named Maud Salter. And Maud was a Scottish artist of Ghanaian descent who passed away in 2008. And on my way to Europe to spend time with Jean, I had learned about Maud and thought that I really wanted to spend time with Maud and maybe I could contact Maud. And that's when I found out that she had passed. And the photographs are an indirect way of me collaborating with both Maud and continuing the work that Maud did with Jean or about Jean and spending time with Jean. So the 8 photographs, which you'll see eventually, they work as diptychs and they are a way of communicating with Jean and accessing different spaces. The collages that you see right now, they also work as diptychs. Oh, well, maybe I'll talk about this work. These are stained glass pieces, and stained glass became really important to me around 2018. Well, to be honest with you, stained glass has always been important to me since as a child. I have been fascinated with colored glass, but more recently I started to actually understand the importance of glass for me. And that importance is that I see glass as being this magic material, this material that is so hard to kind of explain because it can exist in so many different forms. And then when you add color to it, the way that light interacts with the glass and how the glass interacts with space, to me, there is this equivalence of colored glass and the black body that just to me is, there's a beauty beyond words. And so I've been trying to incorporate this glass in this space as a way to capture that essence of the many Black female bodies that exist in this work. The collages are of hands of Black women who are in artworks, and so you'll see the arms and hands of the Black women in artworks or in photographs on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side tend to be an article of fabric or some element of negative space that, for me, situates this woman a bit more. They're a little hard for me to explain because a lot of the work in this exhibition, it's still also, I'm still learning to articulate it. So, you know, sometimes I am able to create the work and it takes a few years sometimes to be able to explain the whys or the hows. So it's much more easier for me to explain the feelings behind the works. And my attempts with this work was to try to reframe art history and the positioning of these women's bodies in art history. I tend to focus on the hand quite often, and it was after doing an artist talk recently that I realized that the hand has always held an importance to me. And I remember seeing Jacob Lawrence's work for the first time and really admiring the scale of hands in his paintings. And to me, the scale really emphasized a strength. There was this empowerment through the hands that has stayed with me. And if you are familiar with my body of work, the hand makes an appearance quite often. So it's not just referencing labor, but it's also referencing a presence. And in the past, I've talked about it as my hand appearing in work to almost affirm my presence of I am here in this space and in this moment. Oh, and there's video works. There's 2 video works in the exhibition as well. And those video works feature a woman who I think is still unnamed. At first I thought it was Laure, who appears in Manet's Olympia, but in some of my research, what I've come across is that it's a model who was potentially dressed and posed to almost imitate Laure in a way. So she comes from a painting by Frederick Bazille from 1870 called Black Woman with Peonies. That's the English translation. And in that painting, she is arranging a floral arrangement. And I became really fascinated with this woman because there was something in me that wanted to participate in that active labor of arranging these flowers. And so I was also interested in how to accentuate her presence, because in a way, the flowers almost take this a forefront, and she's almost in the middle background. So how do I highlight her presence a bit more? And so playing with negative space, I start rearranging the negative space to recreate the painting from memory. So in her absence, very much like Jean, in her absence, she becomes quite present. Here's some stills from one of the videos where I outline and trace her, and the positive space gets traced, and then what's left is are just the pencil markings. So it's another form of labor in an attempt to, again, share space with her. I think that might be it, unless there's questions that I'm happy to answer. I do actually, maybe just to explain the color of the walls in the space. Something that's become really important to me too is learning how to articulate space and the aura of a space, and the aura that I would like to create that the work is perhaps living in that time. And so when discussing with Emily the color of the space, I was saying, I feel like it needs to be in this like purplish blue space, and Emily found this indigo night, which is an absolutely beautiful color, because I feel like it really does bring forth these women a bit closer into our realm.
I know for a fact that it was a very kind of poetic name, and that certainly helps with the show, which is so poetic. And then Daisy's writing, which again, I think really captures the poetry of your work. So I thought I would start off with the first question. People are welcome to send questions through the chat. We have a hello. So hello, Erica, and hello, Daisy. So feel free to pose questions and I'll ask them to the panelists, either interspersing them or at the end. But I did have a question for you both, and this comes from both the text in the, sorry, my cat's stepping on my notes. I have my notes saved now. And that is a question that Erica posed in one of the photographs that you see here, which is, what does it mean to tell the story of someone who has not told it themselves? And this is echoed in Daisy's essay when she says, I am also interested in the questions that Erica's rewriting process, both raise and navigate. How do we share the stories that are live within us? How do we write without using words the stories that objects that have survived through time hold within themselves? Matter evaporates, certain stories remain, but do we know how to tell them? So perhaps the two of you can kind of start your conversation thinking through some of the stories that you're telling here about all of these kind of remarkable women.
Erika, do you want to start?
I think what's really important for me to highlight is that I'm not really trying to tell the story of these women. I'm more interested because I don't know them, and many of these women have not had the opportunity to tell their own stories. And so for me to try to tell their story would be just further kind of fictionalizing or creating this myth around them. I'm more interested in just bringing them to the forefront in a way, and highlighting their presence a little bit more. And something that I will say often is sharing that space with them, uh, because to me, it's such an honor to occupy space with women who have come before and still resonate in the now. What do you think, Daisy?
Well, it's interesting because, and that's one of the first, I would say, in the first conversation that Erika and I had, I admitted firsthand that sometimes the most interesting part for me when I'm invited to write is to think about the words that I don't have to describe something that I'm witnessing or that I'm experiencing. And so it's funny that you would say, well, I'm not maybe attempting to tell the story, because I'll admit that maybe storytelling is one way to address what we're trying to do, but I don't know if that's exactly what we're doing in a factual matter or what I was attempting. But definitely at the contact of this body of work, and the text explored that, but I think more to the point, Erika's practice teased that out to questions the way image, object, and at times language informs how we might perceive someone, how we might understand a story, and challenge us to kind of rethink or reinscribe new ways of articulating or revisiting what's been offered. And I think the power in that is that it leaves so much room for open interpretation, because you're right, there's so much you know about someone, historical figure that came before you. But there are so many ways where one can be revealed, or ways in which one can share space. And I think in this body of work, it's quite tangible. When I was reflecting on the work and trying to find words, I realized that the most honest place for me to be was to share the questions that kept coming to mind, that the work was not attempting to give answer or to rewrite one history, but maybe looking at a plural form in which these stories can coexist, and how they can be received as well. And so my offer was maybe to share the doubts or the questions that emerge as a way to also engage the viewer the same way that Erika is doing, through various rigorous and poetic, strategic, and visual moves to invite the viewer to consider those plural version of one's plurality. And I just love that kind of play between how one comes to share space and open up that space as well.
If I can just also, I realized that in my description, I think I kind of just threw myself in the middle and didn't really get to start from a beginning for those who aren't familiar with Jean. So Jean Duval, it's said, was the partner of Charles Baudelaire, who is a French poet and writer. And Jean Duval was a mixed race female who was an actress, and Baudelaire wrote a lot about her in his poems. A lot of his poetry was based on her. In the photographs you will see, there is a more like a sepia toned photograph that's repeated of who we think is Jean. Maud had done, so Maud Salter, this is Maud Salter here, the Scottish photographer and artist and writer that I mentioned earlier, had learned about Jean and had done a ton of research on Jean and created a body of work that was based on Jean. And if I can just quickly read, just in a very Derrida way of evoking Jean's presence by using her own words. In Maud states, "My research into Jean Duval is an ongoing biographical study of a beautiful woman of remarkable character. a muse who for Baudelaire was the inspiration of some of the world's greatest poetry, a shining catalyst who had stage plays written for her, painted by artists as important as Courbet and Manet, an elusive object of desire photographed by Nadar, who, so that sepia photograph is a photograph by Felix Nadar, who Maud had come to the conclusion was a photograph of Jean. I don't think it's been necessarily confirmed, but I like to believe that too. So just a little bit of background there on who we're also talking about.
No, that's great, because I think one of the very powerful thread in this exhibition is this relationship that Maud has with Jean Duval, and that you engage with both of them in revisiting that narrative. And I think there's something really powerful about that echo. And for myself, being welcome in that narrative was just kind of an amazing opportunity to think through how does one move through these places? How does one have impact into these very important circles? Because as we were talking about this project, I remember, and I'm quoting that essay, but there's not an essay, an interview between the American conceptual artist Lorraine O'Grady, who was also really interested in Baudelaire, and in looking at Baudelaire discovered Jean Duval, and was just so interested in how their relationship, which was one that lasts over 20 years, they never married, they apparently didn't have kids, but she's just making such a beautiful point about the power of relationship and how one artist kind of source material or inspiration, and the fact that even if this woman is not a co-author of his work, is for sure an impactful presence in moving Baudelaire from the romanticism of his writing to modernity, and making him maybe a bit more of an avant-garde writer because he's exposed to her reality, to her life as a mixed race woman in a moment in Paris where so much is changing from new industrial discovery, but a very also important artistic moment. So this woman who's kind of included in these circles ends up having impactful presence in the role of various and very loud artistic voices. And so I just think in Erika's process and in the invitation that was extended to me, the privilege of that presence is one that keeps on giving, because you realize the kind of discrete way in which one make history, and how the sources or the relationship, as impactful as they may be, remain really, really discrete, even though they can be quite powerful. And just wanted to give a little bit more on that, because I just want to keep honoring her like you.
It's amazing how these women echo through space and time, right? And so, I think, so if you look at that photograph right there, the image that's framed in red is an artwork by Maud. And what you see is a tiny photograph of Maud in the left-hand corner. And in my left hand, I'm holding an enlarged version of that. Thank you. Yes, an enlarged version of that. So that's Maud. She's looking at the odalisque painting. But what she's also done is she's cut out Maud's head and placed it on top of Lore, which is this really interesting composition. And a lot of my practice is very intuitive based. And so when creating these compositions and arranging all of these materials, what ends up happening in the second last diptych is almost this recreation of, and a collaboration with Maud in a very similar form that I didn't actually quite realize until after the work had been created. You have those moments where you're like, it was maybe a little more smarter than I thought. So in the photograph before, so this is a really interesting thing, because so in Emily's email to me in 2018 was highlighting this painting by Gustave Courbet, Courbet, called The Painter's Studio, and I like the dates, 1854 to 1855. So if we look at this painting, this is where things get really exciting for me. On the right-hand side, there is a man sitting with a book in his hand. Now that's Baudelaire. In between Baudelaire and the gentleman standing to the left next to the woman with the textile piece on her back, there is this really faint image. And that faint image of a woman is Jean. So the story has it that Jean was originally painted into this photograph, and Baudelaire and Jean, they had this tumultuous relationship. And so, it's like that stereotypical, I love you, I hate you, I love you, I hate you kind of romance. And in this moment, they were in love. So she was painted into the painting. They had an argument, and Baudelaire went to Gustave and said that she must be painted out of this painting. And so Gustave painted her out of this painting, but she still is very much there. In the bottom right-hand corner of the photograph, so this is a reproduction of the painting. I'm actually standing in front of this painting. I got to spend time with this painting in Paris. And so this is my way of acknowledging Jean's presence and standing there with her to say, like, I see you and you're still very much here, which to me, she becomes this, even though it wasn't her who painted her out, she's still present. So it's like this push to still be present against all this amount of effort to erase her. So in this photograph, oh, and funny story is they obviously get back together again after she gets painted out, but the painting had already been hung on display, so she couldn't have been painted back in. So in this photograph that you're seeing here, I end up cutting myself out and placing myself in the corner, very much like Maud did in her series of photographs, and looking into the painting and being almost an active participant in the viewing. On each photograph, you'll see there's writing on the bottom. I was thinking about marginalia at the time, and that's the text that gets written into the margins when we're reading or editing text. And I was really quite interested in how we can look at and read photographs in a similar way. And so what you see written on the bottom of the photographs are some of the thoughts and just some of the words, the things that were really kind of popping into my mind, some elements of research that also was present for me. Just really briefly, this photograph here, when I went to Paris, I went to the street where it was said that Jean lived. And the photograph on the left-hand side is a photograph of the front door of the apartment that she would have lived. And the sculpture that's missing on the wall there is just above where the original title of the street, the name of the street, which in English translated to Headless Woman, which was this lovely, yes, femme sans tête. So it's this, again, this kind of parallel of erasure or the specter and just bringing that back into the present.
Yeah, it's striking as I'm listening to you, Erika, the kind of, well, your intentionality as an artist and an image maker. And it struck me, even if I've spent time with the work and we've shared some reading, you and I, how much still to this day, the Black women body is perceived as a disposable kind of presence. And in your role or in your quest as an artist, the way you want to reinscribe it, or at least include yourself as part of a kind of reinscription. And I'm curious, do you think politically about this movement? Do you think about this gesture of you re-entering the space? Is there a political or more activist agenda in your practice or in the way you make image in reinscribing one's presence?
Well,
how do you think about the gesture itself is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, it's intentional, and it's my attempt to allow myself to frame my body the way I want my body to be framed. Thinking for years now about how women have been framed in work, even thinking about how people will speak about how Baudelaire spoke about Jean in his writing as this exoticized, sexualized, racialized being. She did not get to frame herself in those words. And so this is my attempt to be able to frame myself as a racialized body being present in all of the works that I'm creating here. Oftentimes I don't speak about that because I feel like my body's present, and so it speaks for itself, and that reading will come with the work. So it's not that it's not important, it's very important.
Yeah.
It's just a quieter gesture to highlight something that isn't going to be erased.
Yeah, I just think it gives such also a presence to one's agency to be able to do that, either in a performative matter or in a reinscription. And so when we go back to the question of telling story, I think I imagine those form of reinscription as a different way to tell stories.
Like, you know, it's interesting because I was thinking about Maud and how Maud became present in her work through self-portraiture.
Mm-hmm.
I think about how Jean was painted by Manet, drawn by Baudelaire, potentially photographed by Nadar. I think about all the women in the collages who have been painted or photographed or engraved, and their stories that continue to be told. And something I've been thinking about is like, how do we want our stories to be told?
Yeah.
We might not know how our story is going to be told, but this is one way to have a hand in that, you know?
Yeah. And shift that power dynamic from being a model, like from being a passive actor to being an active participant in attempting to be part of the discourse, to be a clear and active voice in the making of new discourse. And it also bears in mind for me the kind of all the female artists from the same period who maybe played a more active role in doing exactly that, but are absent. And I think this series of collage, if we could go back to it, Emily, we don't need to see this text. We don't need this portrait. I just get, intimidated. This series of collage also kind of create room and maybe a test of that.
Yeah, and and sometimes I'm also kind of challenged by thinking about my drive to almost include so much negative space or the white space. There's like this removal of so much information and leaving just enough information that ends up happening, that when removing the women's faces from this work, that's something that I've been thinking about, but also knowing that the hand is also like this map of their body and of their presence. There's so much that can be said with the hand. And so I'm also thinking about portraiture in my practice and how to reframe like historical readings of portraiture or creations, and how portraiture has been made, and just, I don't know, how to shift that a bit.
Yeah. Do you think something that comes to mind as I'm listening to you talking about these bodies of work is maybe the role of the substitute, like how that comes into your practice, and how do you gauge that play? Does that make sense?
Yeah, like I've thought about the substitute in previous works and like the idea of the surrogate and thinking about what that means, because then that also leads me to thinking about things like repetition. But then it also highlights something that you really bring to the forefront in your essay, which is the idea of translation and what the surrogate does in that moment of translating. It's like this beautiful complexity that continues to add layers, and thinking about these reproductions of women as substitutes of the women is also something else that feels quite complex too, because they're never going to substitute who the woman was or take the place of who the woman was. Even the reproductions of them, or the ways that most of the artists of these women, of these works, were men.
Mhm.
So it's also, how do we know that the way that they're framing these women or perceiving these women are accurate to how the women actually were seen or
Yeah.
perceive themselves?
Mm. Erika, we touched upon it a little bit earlier, but I'm really curious about the source material, like the image that you gather or that you collect as part of this process, and maybe more specifically, in that body of work that or that series very strongly may be Sincerely Fainting. But what's your relationship to the image that you find and in which you intervene? Is there like a methodology to how they come in the studio? Can you speak about that?
So again, it's very intuitive based. So for example, the woman, the Frederick Bazille painting, I had been in Dallas for an exhibition, went to an exhibition on the still life painting, and which was not on my radar as something that would have been something I would have seen. In fact, I almost like turned around, like that's so bad for me to say, but I almost turned around because I was like, maybe I should see something else. But then I went in and here were these paintings of these floral still life arrangements that were all made in France. And I was so drawn to all the petals that had fallen and that had been painted into these paintings. And then there was this painting. So I ordered the book. The book came and there was this Frederick Bazille painting that I don't recall seeing in the no, I did. I think I saw this in the exhibition. I can't quite remember. But when I got the book, this painting stood out to me. And then this woman just lived in my head for the longest time until I was able to try to translate what she was doing in there into the body of work that I had created. And my research is very informal. And so it includes, a lot of reading, looking at artwork. And so when this exhibition, Posing Modernity, happened in New York, I went for the weekend to be able to see this work because I knew that the sketches for this painting, but also some of the paintings of Jean were going to be in the exhibition. And so it was incredibly important for me to go and spend time with this work. And so that's how a lot of the times the images stay and they live. Like it's almost like they become embedded and sewn into my process of thinking, and they don't leave. So I end up, because there's so much, I end up maybe printing out a copy and sticking it up in my room. And so every time I wake up or I'm moving in space, they're with me in a way. And so these images, sorry, Daisy, to cut you off, they came from the Posing Modernity catalog. Because I had created part 1 to this body of work, and this is a part 2, so part 1 was just thinking about all the women influences, artistic in my life, and trying to recreate an art historical text. And then this is the part 2 of including these women, more of these women into that reading.
Thank you. It's just so, it adds layer to how one could read your work in understanding how some of these images come together. But I love the room that you leave for obsession, because that's something you and I talked about, like being obsessed about either writers or books or images, and for some reason they need to enter the work one way or another, or be played out one way or another as a kind of internal process. And I love that room for experiment that you bring into the final work, if something is ever final. I love that they occupy space together.
Thank you. There is like this interestingly bizarre obsession that happens. And it's almost like I like to think of, like I have conversations with them in my mind. And I wonder when creating the work, I wonder what Maud would think in my attempt to honor her and shed light on what she contributed to Jean's history. And what would Jean think? And is she okay with this? And I hope that, that what's really important to me is approaching these women with a large element of compassion that comes through in the work that I'm working with them.
Yeah, and I think it also brings us as viewer, at least for me, in this kind of phenomenological aspect of how one experiences an exhibition or these images, and even going back to Pausing Modernity, this exhibition, which had a huge success, travel everywhere, and it's almost if for the first time, if not the first time, the kind of Black model was considered at the forefront for the role that it had played in making art history. And it makes me think, when I think about historiography, or the kind of, again, how we tell the story, how we write these things, in knowing that in so many instances, there was no control on the part of the subject to kind of leave insights. What are the kind of insights that you want to leave, or what are the object that speaks on your behalf? Because there's that role of object making sense within your work, or tools becoming kind of subjects with the image in your practice. And I wonder if you think about that as an artist and an image maker, what are the things that are telling part of your story?
My personal story?
Yeah, or your practice as an artist. Like you were talking about the role that hands have played in coming back, and maybe a testing of your gesture as an artist, or your intervention as an artist.
You know, it's funny. I think why I'm kind of stumped is because I don't usually think about what my story is.
Mm-hmm.
I think more about like these women, and you know, it's also a part. I mean, I do think about my story when I think about my history, and I'm thinking about when I create work with my mom, or thinking about my grandmother, but it's more about these other women. And I don't really, yeah, I don't know. I don't think I've ever thought about it being about my story. But now I'm going to think about it.
It adds a layer of complexity. I love it. It's because I guess I'm not making the work. So as an observer, I think about what are the object, or maybe the recurrent thread that in the end maybe speaks about you in an interesting way. And I remember, in the same way we're talking about obsession, I remember us talking about books or people we always go back to. So I keep thinking about Gertrude Stein, who we both adore and read over and over. And I would say probably in my case, there's like a bibliography of books that could speak on my behalf very openly. I haven't wrote them, but of the time I've spent with them, maybe that's how I would portray myself if I were to attempt at this exercise. But because objects and image occupy such an important place in your practice, that's what led me to ask the question.
Well, I love, so the title of, and most of the titles of my exhibitions and work have, since meeting Gertrude, have become a collaboration with Gertrude. So like there are fragments from Gertrude's writing that compose the exhibition title.
Work, yeah.
But you just made me kind of excited in thinking about what are the objects or things that I work with or think about, and what kind of biography that might create for me. And then it made me think about this weekend. My mom had sent me this interesting, not this weekend, sorry, this week, she sent me a link to an obituary that she thought was really interesting. And so my response to her email was, I can't remember what I said, something about when my obituary is written, can it be Gertrude Stein-esque? That was really important to me. I need my obituary to be Gertrude Stein-esque. So
and then the question is, what would that look like? Because she was such a prolific and also daring writer.
Well, my hope would be that it would be, you know, poetic and strong, and maybe a little confusing, you know?
Yeah. Misleading in the best way.
Yes, yes.
Sounds about right. Yeah, go ahead, Emily.
It's quite funny you mentioned that, because my great aunt wrote her own obituary, and she wrote several people out of it. So that's a luxury that you can take on yourself if you feel like you need to have it perfectly poetic, perfectly tender buttonsy.
Yes.
It's an assignment you can give yourself. So we're getting some lovely comments from the audience. We have a lovely comment from Kenneth Montague telling us how much he's enjoying our conversation. Anyone who has a question, I encourage you to pose it. But in the interim, I thought I would ask a very self-indulgent question, which comes from loving Erika's work and having a great deal of curiosity about Daisy's work, which I know sugar is something you're kind of really interested in as a material, especially in a kind of post-colonial mode. Looking at these photographs, Erika in particular, you work very beautifully with a mirror, with photographs, and with this kind of very beautiful object, which you told us was a 19th century slide viewer. Is that right?
Yeah, that was purchased at a flea market in Paris. So I'm trying to bring in these objects that also kind of situate me in that location.
Mm-hmm. Did you want to talk maybe a little bit about some of these objects and these tableaus here? Is that something that might be of interest to you?
Sure. Sure. So the mirror was this way of me. I think of mirrors as portals. And so the mirror itself, what you see in the mirror is a reflection of the environment I'm sitting in and creating these photographs. And that was really important for me to think about these layers of place and time, and how these photographs that are exhibited are capturing a moment that can't ever be reproduced. And there's just all these layers and layers of photographs in each photograph. And so, the mirror itself also in one of the photographs reflects my hair as I'm thinking about Jean's hair and a poem that Baudelaire wrote about her hair. And in that poem, there is this exoticization that happens when describing her hair, and thinking about the mirror itself capturing my body as well in that space. The objects, the other objects that have been brought in are either from Paris itself or photographic reproductions of the works that I've been thinking about and working with. I'm trying to think of what I can't remember. Oh, one of the objects is also a book, a map. Yes. So, okay, so I forgot about the rocks. So those rocks are also rocks that I collected on that street where Jean had lived. And that book is a book that I use when trying to navigate France as well. What I'm doing with the marker there is I'm tracing my lifeline on my hand, and I'm actually moving backwards. I believe so much in how the past informs the present and how we have so much to learn from that.
We've got a lovely comment from one of the audience members saying here that they appreciate the respect, care, and empathy with which you approach the lives of these women who are no longer with us. You've spoken a little bit about how much you consider and sort of converse with them as you work through the creation of these images. And, speaking about reinscription as a kind of iterative process with Lorraine O'Grady and Maud Salter, how do you see this body of work sort of fitting within that sort of constant process of maybe translation and retranslation as a conversation kind of ongoing?
I hope, in all honesty, I really hope it just kind of extends it. It's like a continuation that, there are these threads, and then this is just a thread that's being tied onto it and extending that life. And then who knows what will be created after that. And I really want and would love for the text that Daisy created to be like, to me, it's all a part of that fabric that helps to honor these women, but also just reiterate their presence for us to continue thinking about them, you know?
Thank you, Erika. That's such a kind, and I mean, the invitation to write this text came so much out of that empathy and giving room to someone who's, you know, sharing space with you, you and I in this moment to reflect on it. But if I may, to your point, Emily, when I was reading this interview with Lorraine O'Grady, which I believe might be my portal or the reference through Jean. So Erika brought the story to me and then I started digging a little bit, but I just love so much how O'Grady is so mindful about the subtlety in which one can forget the influence of a relationship or that impact that can be so discreet, and underline how this otherness that Jeanne brings into the life of Baudelaire creates this whole new place for this artist to work through his own practice. And I will say, in writing this text and thinking about translation as a mechanism, I wrote the text in French and it was translated in English. And I was sharing with Erika how peculiar of a place it is to read yourself in another language, one that you speak, but that you may not master, and how it always feels like someone else is speaking on my behalf when I read a translation of my work. Even in the most poetic or attentive translator, it's like another version of yourself. And thinking about that as such an interesting correspondence to the work of Erika, her own practice. But to your earlier point, the interest that I have in sugar or in material studies as a way to look at cultural and post-colonial theory is also for me a very assertive position as someone who write or curate or is in conversation with artists, to think with a lot of distinction about what I bring to the table, and finding a way that is informed and uninformed at the same time. So not copying a way of doing a canon in any way, but I will say this to remain really opaque. And so thinking about Edouard Glissant, this incredible Caribbean poet and writer who had such a huge influence on me and my thinking opacity, about the right of one to be as discrete, as complex, as individual as one might be, as a way to assert your present in this moment while being aware of the colonial history that has attempted to define you or constrain you. And I think to all of these points is just bringing me back to Erika's work and this right to write a story or to present potential narrative as a version, not as an ultimate truth. And that opacity is, I think, a place where we both meet. And probably exemplify or just as a result of all of those, histories, colonial histories being also part of who we are, that I've embraced with a lot of experiment and exploration to this writing assignment. Does that make sense?
I love the idea of the possibilities, and I think that's what is so invigorating for me when learning about these people. It's just the possibilities of what could be or what once was, and how that gets framed in the now, and by who.
And owning that fully. I think there's a place that is really, or I feel very unapologetic, even when I put something in the world that I never consider anything to be final, which is what we were talking about. But I feel very assertive as part of this process. Vulnerable, but assertive.
Yeah, because, you know, I can never ever state at all that, or with certainty, that I know that what I'm presenting is all that there is and what there should be.
Of course.
You know? Yeah. It's just, I guess you can say it's just one person's imagining, you know, of that potentiality of these women.
Well, we have a question from the audience. And actually I should say my new boss, so I have to be very diligent when I read it. So Karen is asking if you can comment on how your collaborative process in coming to this work as the maker and commentator is an homage to these women who did not meet each other.
Sorry, so do you mean, Karen, do you mean like the women who didn't meet each other as in the women who are featured in the work?
That's how I understand it.
Yes.
Okay. So, I love that idea because sometimes I wonder if some of these women may have met each other or have known about each other or seen each other in passing. Because so many, especially from the posing modernity text, when you're reading the timelines, some of these women who were circus performers, actresses, singers, I wonder, if there was this community that existed beyond our knowledge. What do you think, Daisy?
It's such a great question.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it could be an assumption that if they didn't cross path or literally talk to each other, they certainly shared space, not maybe deliberately or not as deliberately as Erika and I, of course, but that in the role that they were able to occupy, I want to imagine as Black women, there's a lot, as you're mentioning, performative work, circus work, and all of this way, these moments of, for lack of better words, being on display or being in the realm of performance. The homage part is really moving to me because I think my attempt, there is so much to write or consider when you encounter these fragment of stories, and specifically for me, it was just so moving to imagine this woman who came from Haiti, being half Haitian myself. And so there was like a personal affiliation where I wouldn't even dare to imagine what her journey has been to end up in Paris. But I want to dream, and I know that I'm indebted to her, to that kind of journey, to that kind of courage. And so I would say in the collaborative process that Erika and I have found, or in the invitation, there was something very intuitive and just so generous in the way that I was brought in, where I could feel it was an impulse, like, could we be in conversation? And what it means to have the luxury to ask that, to say, like, I just want to get to know you, and can we share part of our history or whatever it is that we're doing for a moment and see what comes out of it. And so I think in this moment, I'm in a state of reverence for the women that we are quoting, misquoting, or referencing, or inhabiting space with. And if the words that we share or the image that we make allow for more attention to their lives, then the better. I think we share that intention or yeah, that generosity quite genuinely, and that's one of the place where we met. That and many book reference, again looking at women writings as a way to maybe find words or testimony of what we're sharing and experiencing as we discover more of them, or learn to engage with more of them.
Something that I loved about what you did, Daisy, was writing the text in French initially, because one of the most beautiful imaginings is Jean being able to read what you're writing without the need for a translation.
Yeah.
I loved that. And, it's just this idea that maybe she can read what we're saying, what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. It's true. Yeah, we were talking about it. It does feel like a good way to spend time with ghosts.
Okay, well, that was a great question from Karen, and she agrees that your choice to write the essay in French did seem to evoke their time and space as well. So I'm not seeing any more questions from the audience. If anyone wants to put a question, I'm happy to share that with the columnists, with Erika and Daisy, who are not columnists right now. Otherwise, I think we've been here for about an hour, so I don't want to take your full afternoon, Erika and Daisy.
Well, maybe we just say a bientôt.
Yes, thank you so much for everyone for joining us. I really appreciate it.
This is a wonderful way to spend a beautiful afternoon. So I'm so grateful to you both. Erika, your exhibition remains on view. Once we reopen, of course, people will be able to see it. Right now, it's in the dark. Daisy, your essay is online. We have a class with you on February 20th for those who are interested. And after we take a look at this recording of today's talk, we'll do our best to get it online. So thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you do enjoy your afternoons. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
À bientôt. Bye.
Bye now.